As a woman of faith, I listened for stories about God. And I was also surprised here to find that in the midst of some dark days, some torturous days, many of the women said they experienced a presence there with them. Now, this didn't come because they had been churched or brought up in a particular faith. A girl rescued at age 19 told me that in some of her dark days, she used to cry out to someone out there to help her. She said no one ever took her to church. She had never been taught anything about how to pray or religion, but she sensed the power of a transcendent being with her. Now I know she's a woman of faith, and I said, "What happened?" She said, "Well, I went to YouTube and I typed in how to pray." And that was the beginning of her faith journey. Another woman told me that while she was on the track, two elderly women pulled up in a car and said to her, "Honey, would you like to go to church with us?" She said, "For some reason, I jumped in that car and I figured I could earn my money for my pimp later on, and I went off to a Pentecostal church with them." And she said, "Nobody shamed me for the way I was dressed. Nobody judged me. All I felt was love. And the ladies promised to bring me back to the same street. So when they did, I was sitting in the back seat of the car, and one of the women turned around and said, 'Honey, do you know how much Jesus loves you?' And she said, something in me melted. And right at that point, I accepted Jesus as loving me unconditionally. I opened my heart to him in the back seat of the car where so many of her transactions had taken place. God came to her in the back seat of the car.
Well, I feel like I can handle a lot more than some people because of what I've experienced. I think it has almost opened the door for me to be able to be there for other people when they're having a hard time, because I know what it's like to have a really hard time. And because of that, I become a rock for them to lean on. And also, I have found that I'm able to transcend the situation. So an example would be, I don't believe that people are bad. I believe people do bad things. And because of my experience, I've just been able to develop a major sense of empathy, and it's really helped me in my work with my clients.
She reminds me of an Old Testament woman who was a domestic slave for a very famous family. And when the wife couldn't get pregnant, as was the custom of the time, the husband had sex with her so she could bear a child. Then this woman suffered the abuse of the jealous wife and ran off into the desert to escape. Now, this woman was considered a pagan from another culture. And in the desert, God sent her two messengers to comfort her. And it turns out that she's the only woman in the Old Testament who named God. She called him El Roi, the God who sees me. How many women feel invisible? Women who are sold, abused, betrayed, and tortured feel like no one sees them. But this woman named God as the one who sees. She gave birth to a son who is called Ishmael, which means, God has heard my prayer. This woman's name is Hagar, and I felt very close to her these days because to me she's almost a model of what's happened to so many of these young girls and women who've been trafficked. In the midst of her suffering, she has experienced a God who was there for her and who did see her when nobody else noticed. I discovered interviewing these women that some of them had spiritual practices that helped them towards resilience. And one Buddhist woman told me that even during her trafficking experience, She practiced mindfulness meditation that she had learned as a little girl in her Buddhist Sunday school. She said it helped her to calm down, and she continues to practice that spiritual practice. Many of them discovered other techniques with breathing and meditation and relaxation exercises that helped them to nurture a spiritual life that meant something for them.
So for me, when I heard the lyrics in my mind, "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot," I had no idea what they were until I did some research on it and realized that it was a song that the slaves sang as they dreamt of freedom on the Underground Railroad. And in that, realizing that I had been a slave and that I was being freed from that slavery, it wasn't necessarily that I was handcuffed to a radiator, but I was in mental and emotional bondage for many, many years. And I went to the Psalms, and in Psalm 32:7 it says, "For the Lord is my protection, and He gives me songs of deliverance." And that is what "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot" means to me.
The creative arts were a very strong factor in their resilience. One of our young women survivors in Los Angeles wrote a play about her experience called "Letters from My Mother."
And I was trafficked. I was not able to speak to my family. I was not able to speak to anybody. But my mother wrote me letters all the time. I didn't tell her what happened, but she knows something happened. So I keep reading this letter, and that's how my life kept going. Like I know that I'm going to see her one day. I have hope and dream that I didn't do anything wrong. Good things will come to me. That was my first play, and in my life I had no idea that will happen to me and that I will write a play, but I am so glad I did.
So the creative arts really nurtured a spirit of resilience. For some of the women, it was sculpture, using their hands to shape how they felt. For others, it was watercolors and textiles. Some told me that writing songs helped, or singing their hearts out, or listening to music.
Art has been a very important part of the reason why I'm here today. It played a significant role in my survival and my road to freedom. And it's also been an integral part of my healing process. The ability to express myself through creativity has been a part of my liberation.
But I discovered a common thread, that somehow the creative arts were the impetus of a lot of healing.
The journaling process for me has been really healing because it has helped me process my trauma in a way that I wouldn't be able to process by talking to someone. I enjoy journaling because it helps me get out everything that's inside of me onto paper. And especially with my blog, being able to journal, to go through my old journals and blog my old entries and do a present-day reflection has really been a deeper healing for me, because I really have seen about where I've come from to where I'm at today, and it's a big difference.
And we know that trauma is held in the body, deeply in the body. And for many of these women, they discovered that some kind of body work helped them with their transformation. For several of them, they practiced yoga. Others found that dance freed their spirits. Exercise, working out at the gym, whatever the shape it took, the exercise really helped to transform them into resilient women. Many of them thought of suicide, but most of them told me it was the longing and the hope to see a family member once again. It was relationships with other human beings that helped them in their healing from trauma. Also, nature played quite a role with them. When I asked them about an image for their resilience, some of them mentioned the moon, some of them mentioned the ocean, and I found that their walking in nature has helped them to heal. For some of them, it's just sitting by a body of water that has helped them with their own resilience. It takes time for them to tell their stories, a long time, before they gain trust and feel it's okay. And usually it's listening to other survivors tell their stories that gives them the hope they too can do it. And most of the programs help women with storytelling workshops. One of the challenges of feminine spirituality is for a woman to learn how to use her voice. These survivors have learned how to use their voices.
Testifying in front of Congress, advocating for resources and more awareness in our country that this happens here. Testifying on behalf of a bill to strengthen protections against victims or for victims. It has given me a platform to continue to rise above the oppression and the injustice that was done to me.
For some of these women, recovery meant learning English, and that takes time. But one woman said to me, "The more I talk, the more free I feel." So we encourage them to keep telling the story. Through storytelling, they develop a strong sense of self and actually a new identity. In most of these women, I heard a desire to give back to the community. Some of the women were rescued by a neighbor who had his eyes open. Some of them decided that they wanted to be leaders in the fight against human trafficking, and they've become advocates. Whereas others just decide they want to continue living their lives. I noticed that some of the survivors have developed their own organizations, their nonprofits. Others have become very successful at educating the public about human trafficking, but it all comes from a deep desire to be a good citizen and to give back to the community.
I have a big dream as God let me help, and I dreaming about big house and maybe to welcoming people to, who need help like me before, because before I have no nothing and people help me. Now my life is okay, and I'm willing to help one another. That is my future.
Several of the women told me that their experience gave them a deep sense of empathy for other people. In their work as psychotherapists, counselors, they have learned how to listen and how to help others heal. We can learn that in our own sufferings and our own challenges, that there is always hope. There are always sources of resilience that can move us from the darkness into the light. And we can also learn from these blessed women about wisdom, the innate wisdom that lives in our bodies and in our creativity that will eventually free us and transform us.